Hi everyone, it's Ina from Ina C Watercolor. Today we're going to paint a seascape painting together, and that is one of my all-time favorite motifs. I live in the Pacific Northwest and there is no shortage of oceans, blue skies, and boats and reflections. In this video, I am going to take you through the process of how I approached the subject, modified a reference material, did the drawing, as well as step-by-step painting process. I will be pausing at specific moments where either I have to make a decision or have to problem solve an area that is tricky to paint. So you guys get a chance to listen to my thinking process as I go, which I do believe is important to understand, because watercolor is never just about applying paint to paper. There are a lot of processing, constant problem solving involved, because water dries up, time is of the essence, and you only have one chance to make it right. But that is the charm of watercolor painting to begin with, which is really engaging and challenging at the same time. So this is the reference photo of today's painting. I took this photo when my husband and I were visiting Westport. I particularly like kind of the serenity of the scene, because how relatively quiet the water at the marina is, reflecting these shapes of the boats as well as the glow of the sky during sunset really nicely. I think in terms of painting, it can be quite challenging to paint a sunset color because it requires you to blend yellow and blue together, which the two colors tend to create a hue of green. So the way to approach it, I'm thinking maybe use two brushes kind of separately, so to avoid mixing yellow too much with the blue. But also I think adding a bit more lavender color will help as a bridge color. So in terms of the composition, I think largely it doesn't need a lot of modification. I do notice that the tip of the boat here is aligning with the condo complex in the background. So maybe I'll move this condo over here. Yeah, it's weird. It's like this huge condo complex in the middle of nowhere in this beautiful marina, which I think is the signature kind of landmark of the Westport Marina. It's very easily identifiable. And in terms of these boats over here, what I may do is that I will increase the size of this boat to this and kind of create a little bit more depth in the back. If I don't create kind of like a sizable chunk of objects over here, painting will look like as if it's just this boat and it's about this boat. So create a bit of more like large, medium, and then small size boats, then it creates this scene, right? So yeah, that's in terms of composition how I would go about modifying it. So the very first thing to draw is the horizon line. In this case, I think I would like it to be slightly more than half for the marina itself, and then started marking the bounding box of the key objects in the foreground, including the marina on the left-hand side and how large the main boat will look, as well as the condo complex in the background. Just taking the time capturing the shape of this first boat, because it is our focal point, so I don't want it to be too abstracted. So just taking my time to get the shape right. And to kind of make up things a little bit as well, to get some of the shape that has a little bit more rhythm and not entirely flat. And just the marina in the background on the right hand side, I do want to add some of the kind of the protruding these infrastructures on these large commercial fishing boats in the distance, just to be able to kind of break the homogeny of that horizon line over there. So it has a little bit more depth and shapes punctuating through it. So just drawing alongside a lot of these boats in the distance will be fairly abstracted, so I just want to just create some shapes to remind myself later on, like, you know, here's how I would apply my brush strokes, but not really painting all of these objects individually. And the skyline involves some building and also this in the middle of nowhere condo complex. It had some windows reflecting the skylight. I would probably need to capture that using a white gouache in the end because they are fairly small. Now just finishing off some of the details, making sure the reflections are also outlined so I can remember to paint them correctly when I add the paint. Now I just decided to move the condo complex to the right a bit further because the previous position makes it look as if it's taking over the entire empty spot in the center between these two rows of boats. So by moving it to the right, got connected to this shed so that it would not look kind of like, you know, too odd on its own. I do like using a brush to brush off any eraser debris right away so they don't stick around all over my paper. After stepping back and looking at the drawing overall, I decided to actually reduce the size of the boats on the left-hand side, especially the front boats, because boats are of light color, and by placing so big of a white area on the left, I think it's taking away the attention of the center boat a bit too much. I think it would just look better if that front boat especially doesn't look like a one large blob. Now let's get started with the painting. Okay, so real quick, palette for today. Got, as usual, ultramarine blue, burnt umber, burnt sienna, Elysian crimson. May use a little bit of violet. I got like a lavender going for some of the brighter spots in the sky to transition as well with the cadmium yellow. I got a little bit of cobalt turquoise in case we need some accent. We'll see. But yeah, otherwise this is pretty standard. I did have a bit of pale peach color as well in case for some of the cloud might work better to have a bit of like a gouache body to it. First, I just wet down the sky area. I like to let it sit there a little bit while I mix the colors because I don't want the paper to be completely drenched, which will blend the color all into one mass. But in this case, because there's actually quite clear definition of the clouds, I want to maintain the shape of the clouds, and therefore I want to wait for the paper to be dry up a little bit so the sheen has left the paper, which means at that stage the paints will mix, but they will not bleed into each other. See that I actually now taken up on the second brush. So the first brush was used to mix the lavender slash blue tone of the sky, and the second brush I want to load it with the orange yellow color so that when I paint I can alternate between these two brushes so that I don't mix them and accidentally create green color into the sky. So first painting the clouds with the lit surface. This way I can remember the position the clouds are in, and later on when I paint the sky, I don't overwrite it. And there is gradation of different orange. Some are more yellow, others are red in the picture. So I made sure to create several different shades of orange and yellow. Now I'm just mixing a bit more of the lavender color into the blue as I continue on painting the sky from top to bottom. So the bottom of the clouds are actually closer to the sky color. However, I decide to kind of take the risk of blending a bit more lavender into the orange hue because I want the cloud to appear as one mass instead of these yellow streaks, which is more believable. So I think I'm happy with the outcome. It doesn't look too muddied up. It created a really nice warm gray that suggests these are the bottom of the clouds. Once I'm done applying majority of the paint, I went in with a dry brush, kind of dabbled around the highlight area of the clouds, just creating a little bit more of the sharper areas where the eyes can land on as they look at the clouds, which kind of going down and inviting the viewer into the main scenery of the marina. Next up, I mixed some pretty thick paint because there are these darker clouds hanging on the left-hand side and overlaps a little bit with the brighter one. I really like that dimension because it suggested that these clouds are in fact lower and closer to the viewer, where the illuminated clouds are higher up in the sky. I have also exaggerated kind of the contrast of these darker clouds in order to make sure that they will play a role in the composition as well. Because this is at sunset, possibly after the sun has already set, so there isn't really that many bright areas. The sun's intensity is at its lowest right now. That's why I don't want to leave any of the white on the paper. So before I go ahead and do the reflection, I coated all of the boats and the marina with a cool gray, so that later on there wouldn't be any white of the paper shown through. After a few minutes, the wash has largely dried up, so now it's time to paint the reflection portion, for which I have started mixing some more of the same color that we have used for the sky and the clouds, so that we have enough pigment going into painting this large area. Similarly, wet down the entire area that we're gonna paint. Reflection typically is softer than the objects themselves. That's why we will have to paint this area in one go, making sure we preserve as many soft edges as possible. But some of the shapes will need to be more distinct than others. So this can be quite challenging. Just need to pay attention and be very careful about where I apply paint. Okay, using a third brush to load up the yellow hue, and similarly start with the yellow so that making sure that they're not overtaken later on by the blue. Making sure the yellow also have a bit of variation between the cool yellow and the warm yellow. Oh, that blue is a little bit too saturated, so I'm gonna dull it down with some burnt sienna, and let's continue on. You see that I'm also applying some of the darker or grayer orange color because the reflection typically is also darker than the object itself. That's why you see that the entire reflection of the boat, despite the fact that the boat is white, the reflection is in fact darker. I need to make sure every shape in the clouds is mirrored in the reflection as well. And some of the areas seems like they could use a bit more of a highlight. So I use a dry paintbrush to lift some of the pigments. This part is to make sure that these darker lower clouds are also reflected in the water, because you can tell from the photo reference that just that part of the reflection is a tinge darker. Next, we're going to apply some mid to dark tones to the marina, and that's what's going to create all of these shapes of the boats. First step, in order to make the boats look as if they're one connected shape and not taking too much of a visual dominance, I spot wetted the paper, so I will get some bleeding edges and soft edges when I paint the boats. Want to suggest some of the darker areas here are part of the windows as well as the reflections of these posts, and I want to make sure that I capture that. Background boats, as long as I just kind of follow the initial drawing to create some suggestive shapes, I think you will read as these are the boats. Let's not forget this jetty in the background is more of a warmer hue of a gray. So I added some burnt sienna and burnt umber to make sure that in terms of color hue, it distincts itself from these boats in the foreground. Although some of the buildings in the background are actually further away, so even within the same shape, it helps to use different hues of warm and cool gray, so they look like they're not just a flat shape, but has dimensions to it. And now we need to create a reflection of these condo complex. That's why I wetted the areas for the reflection, so that the reflection of the condo is not gonna look as dominant. After I finish painting that shape, I just use a fairly small brush, dab with some water to kind of smear the colors together while they're still wet. That way the contrast between these shapes isn't that striking. Also because boats have this curved shape, which translates into more of a soft blended color. So that is what I was after. Now adding some more details to the condo building. Well, I tried to leave out some of the reflective lights on the window, but I think in the end, it's creating too much of a complexity for no good reason, and it's drawing too much attention away from the other objects. That's why I just ended up painted over and try to just create one shape for this entire building. Now, before we move on to the next area of the marina, I want to add some highlights to the boats. One funny thing about painting boats is that the stripe pattern alongside the hull of the boats, once you apply them, it kind of immediately, come to life as, aha, I see a boat there. So that's a pretty good trick to use. And it's especially good if you apply these lines with a dry brush and the thick paint. That way it will bleed just a little bit with the body of the boats. Cool, I think the left-hand side is largely done. And now let's move to the next portion of the mid-value tone. So immediately connected with the condo building is this shed on the dock. Note that in the picture, this is a pretty bright blue color, but I chose to tone it down a little bit because we don't want to draw too much attention to this building. but I do like having it there because this building helps breaking up the otherwise very homogeneous shapes of the boats. Using similar approach, apply dark tones onto the boats, especially the window areas, and smear them up just a little bit so that they don't look as high contrast. As I move towards the main boat, because the main boat has these red kind of accent to it, I want to make sure that that red is reflected in some of the other areas as well. So that's why I'm applying some of the warmer yellow and red hues to the accent areas of the boats. These boats are pretty much connected all in the background, so I wetted down the entire area and then just let the color bleed into each other as they will. However, I did use relatively thick paint, that way they wouldn't create a blotchy effect. And I feel like the shape is maybe too lost as compared to the boats on the left hand side. So I used a paper towel to lift some of the paint up and to create more of a clear shape for one of the front boats. Now let's move on to painting the reflection of the main boat, which is going to be darker than the first coat of paint. Hull of the boat, it is also slightly darker than the cabin above. And just be very careful and apply now some of the darker hue for the reflection while it's still wet. And then transition onto painting some of the details on the hull of the boat. Reflection is kind of tricky because you do have to work quickly while everything is wet. I think the hardest part of this painting is pretty much done. Now we're just going to add some details to the cabin of the boat. When I was applying this line alongside the hull of the boat, I think I didn't load it with enough paint. Or maybe it's just this paintbrush not very good with holding paint. This is another cheap synthetic brush I got. Maybe I do need to think about getting a small brush that can hold more paint, or maybe next time just use the rigger to paint these long thin lines. But you can always do multiple attempts to create that line. It's not the end of the world. Now switching to actually using the rigger and trying to punctuate this connected shape of boats with some details to break it up a little. and adding a bit of visual interest and sharpness that people can rest their eye on when they look at the painting. In some of the background, building has a bit of detail. Gotta be careful not to be too prescriptive about it. Adding a bit of masks as well as the fishing boat infrastructure. I don't know what they're called, unfortunately. And moving on to the right hand side of the painting, I don't know if these are called masts because these are not sailboats. Last step, using the white gouache to add some accent, especially the windows on the condo building that reflects some of the skylight. And maybe just to help the shape pop a bit more on the main boat. Okay, this is the finished painting of the boats at the Westport Marina. I think overall I have accomplished what I set out to do, which is to capture that peaceful scene with relatively still reflections and the sunset in the background. What I particularly like about this painting are just kind of how soft and hard edges have been permeating across the entire painting, created a bit of lovely rhythm for the eyes to bounce off of, and having these small objects to kind of catch your attention and carry you on throughout the painting without getting too distracted by kind of the background of the marina, where the focal point is just really on this fishing boat at the foreground. In terms of color mixing, I think I would like to still improve in terms of the sky color. There are still areas where you will see where the yellow and the blue meet each other, and it's just not kind of created this bleeding edge of green hue, which I'm not fond of in particular. On the other side, I think this corner of the sky in general, the top portion of the sky, ideally could be a little bit darker as well. I think that despite, trying to get the color right on the palette as much as possible before applying them to the paper, it still takes a lot of skill and practice. Somehow this is one of those things that I'm still learning and trying to nail down, kind of the consistency of the paint, how rich, how dark the color is, and when you apply to the paper versus when it dries, because it always dries light. So yeah, maybe one last piece here I would like to improve is the definition of these darker clouds on the left side. Some of them got captured here, but the rest of them kind of is lost in this corner. Again, this is one of those very hard to master techniques, I would say, when you have wet on wet, but the thickness of the paint is also really crucial. So I think what happened in this case is that in order for the darker cloud to show up with certain kind of fidelity in the water, they need to be much thicker paint so that it doesn't bleed all over the place, which was what happened here when I applied it. So they kind of just blended into the rest of the area here and have lost their fidelity. But yeah, overall, very happy with the painting. Wow, I can't believe you guys have made through the video because this is a long one. If you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate you clicking the like button or subscribe, which will really help surfacing this video to more people in search of this type of content. Since I'm relatively new to YouTube, I would really appreciate your feedback, whether positive or critical. Any advice at all would really help me grow my future content and make it more engaging and useful to you. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.